You know, these old classics, they tell familiar stories that pretty much anyone can find relatable. I mean, this is just your everyday depiction of a human-loving titan being chained to a rock for all eternity so that an eagle can peck out his liver every day, magically predicting the future to a talking cow. It's pretty standard stuff. Welcome, greetings all! Today we are going all the way back to the classics from ancient Greece with Prometheus Bound. You know, given that it centres on a character chained immobile to a rock, this is a remarkably fast-paced and exciting play, at least within the confines of the ancient Greek theatrical tradition. You know, it's very easy to think of the people of ancient Greece in a kind of fictitious way, almost as if they're like characters from a novel, like they're from Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones or something like that. Ironic then that it's these stories about gods and demigods and people transformed into animals that remind us just how human those people really were. Let's cast our eyes back 2.5 millennia to the 5th century BC for a truly ancient, great work! Prometheus Bound is generally considered to be the work of Aeschylus, who, along with Sophocles and Euripides, is remembered as one of the great writers of tragedies from ancient Greece. Indeed, if we are to believe Aristotle, then Aeschylus can be seen as the point of origin for all Western theatrical tradition, given that he had the idea of having more than one character coming and going on stage, as opposed to having just one character conversing with a chorus. Of course, it took Sophocles to figure out that you could even push it to having 3 characters plus the chorus on the stage, and from there was no looking back. These tragedies were mostly written for a festival held to honour Dionysus, the Dionysia. After various traditional songs and dances, everyone would gather around a stage, and then they would kill a bull, because, you know, that's just the thing to do, and then everybody would watch a collection of plays. Each playwright would enter 4 plays per festival. They would submit 3 tragic plays, which would be performed 1 per day, and then on the day after that, they would have written a comedy, a satire play. Aeschylus was pretty much the undisputed champ of these events, especially once he had the idea of using the 3 separate days to perform 3 parts of a trilogy, at least until that young upstart Sophocles came along and stole his thunder. Now, I said that this play is generally considered an Aeschylus tragedy, but that is in dispute. Ooh, on this channel we love a good authorial dispute, especially when the work in question was written 2,500 years ago, and we will never ever get a definitive answer on this question. Probably. Since ancient times, it's been listed as an Aeschylus play. That's how it was listed in the Great Library of Alexandria. And, you know, that's probably a big reason why it managed to survive all these years. And, you know, it's incredible that any play survived from ancient Greece. You know, we lost a bunch of Shakespeare plays, and that was only a few hundred years ago. Personally, I lean towards the side of authenticity. That is to say, that Aeschylus wrote this play. I just think we have more reason to believe that this is Aeschylus's work than reason to believe that it isn't. You know, I don't think we have sufficient surviving material from Aeschylus to be able to conclude that stylistically it's too different to be his work. And, you know, scholars who've looked into this in a technical way have argued both sides of the case. And beyond that, some people who believe that Aeschylus may not have been the one behind this play have pointed to his great surviving trilogy, the Oresteia, and said someone who is so pious when talking about Zeus as he is in those plays couldn't have written this one, which is so critical. But I'm not convinced. I mean, for one thing, there are a lot of hints that this trilogy is going to conclude with reconciliation between Prometheus and Zeus. And indeed, that's backed up by what fragments we have surviving of Prometheus Unbound. Thank you very much for preserving such a nice chunk of it, Cicero-senpai. In those fragments, we learn that Zeus has had a change of heart when thinking about the other Titans, and he's set them free from Tartarus. Sounds like that could be foreshadowing another little bit of a reconciliation, maybe? But for me, more importantly, you know, we've only got 7 surviving plays from Aeschylus, or 6 if you think this one isn't one of them. And one thing that's abundantly clear from such a small surviving body of work is that Aeschylus loved surprising changes of perspective and sympathy. You know, at the beginning of the Eumenides, Aristotle says the Furies were so terrifying that when they came on stage, old men wet themselves and women went into labour right there and then, just at the sight of them. Oh, I know how it feels to get that kind of reception. But Eumenides means the kind ones, the kindly ones, which is what the Furies become, at least thanks to an Athena ex machina. And then there's his very influential play, The Persians, and while he wasn't the first to do this, This is Aeschylus writing from the perspective of the enemy. He, as a Greek constantly at war with the Persians, is making Xerxes into a tragic hero. And sure, whether the audience at the time was meant to be delighting in Xerxes' suffering or sympathizing with him is a matter that's up for debate, but are we really saying that there is no way Aeschylus could have written Prometheus Bound? Because he just couldn't possibly have imagined the point of view of characters that Zeus had done terrible things to being critical of Zeus? I think that's a little iffy. And the last point that comes up in this debate about authorship is that we know of a few parodies of this play that came up about 30 years after Aeschylus had died. So the argument then is that it would be pretty weird to make a parody of this play so long after the fact, so probably it was quite fresh and new at the time. But, you know, I'm not really on board with that line of thinking either. Some of the parodies we're talking about came from Aristophanes, and I can tell you Aristophanes loved him some Aeschylus. He has lines about how great Aeschylus was over and over again in his plays, in The Birds, in Lysistrata. You know, he shows up as a character in The Frogs. Gex coax coax. That play, The Frogs, makes it clear that Aeschylus' The Persians was getting repeat performances and was still relevant at the time. So I just don't see how it follows that for Prometheus Bound to be parodied, it must have been recent and probably written by Aeschylus' son Euphorion, who, by the way, Aristophanes never bothers to praise. But, you know, I am completely prepared to have my mind changed about this if there's some evidence that I don't know about. And yes, we can never be absolutely certain about who wrote this play. But I really don't think we can decisively conclude that this wasn't Aeschylus' work, any more than we can decisively say that, you know, Francis Bacon wrote Shakespeare's plays, or Truman Capote was the one who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. Anyway, whoever the writer was, this definitely stands as a great work. It may not quite reach the heights of the Oresteia, which is a stunning piece of work, but it probably is even more striking in its language and in some of its imagery. And if you want my opinion, it's a lot more fun to watch. Okay, plot summary. We open with Hephaestus chaining Prometheus to a rock in the mountains of Scythia, the edge of the world. And don't get too excited, all you flat earthers, this is mythology. Now Prometheus of course is very mighty, so Hephaestus is helped to do this by Zeus's pushy mouthpiece Bia, sometimes translated as might, and by Kratos. Somewhere on the internet, you just know that there's already a fanfic about these two. When those guys leave, job done, Prometheus rages about the injustice of his situation. Then, the first of many visitors to this barren land appear. In fact, a whole group of them, the chorus. These are the Oceanids, the daughters of the Titan Oceanus. If you've ever been to the Trevi Fountain in Rome, he's the big guy in the middle. Yeah. Now, he's a Titan, so these guys might be a little biased against Zeus, but Oceanus is kind of like the Switzerland of the Titans. That is to say, he pretty much stayed out of all the major conflicts that the Titans took part in. Now, some of these Oceanids were quite important figures in Greek mythology, the most famous possibly being Doris, which was probably a really cool name until it became an old lady name. Oh, hello, Doris. How's your nephew, Atlas, getting on? Okay, so Prometheus tells the Oceanids about his situation. You know, even though he's a Titan, Prometheus was once a great ally of Zeus. It was him that gave him the advice to topple Kronos by guile rather than by force. But then he went against Zeus's authority by giving fire to human beings. And, you know, a little bit like Eve, he is being punished for bringing knowledge and power to humanity. Prometheus claimed he bequeathed not just fire, but culture as well. You see, all the beautiful things of human society stem directly from his gifts, at least according to him. He is proud and defiant, and you know, it's his belligerence that has exacerbated the position he's in now. If he just submitted to Zeus, probably this would all be over for him. But tragic heroes need tragic flaws, and arguably Prometheus's is stubbornness. He will not hear of submission, even when Oceanus himself shows up and tries to reason with him. He sees Zeus as a selfish tyrant, and he will never acquiesce. And besides, he's got a bit of the prophet in him. He's able to see a bit of the future, and he suggests he might just know what will cause Zeus's downfall. After Oceanus leaves, Io wanders onto the stage. Now, Io is an interesting character, and I would really like to know how the Greeks portrayed her on stage. At this point, she is in the form of a cow. She's depicted in most sources as the daughter of one of the Oceanids, Melia, and her father was a human, the king of Argos. You know, that they're usually sons and daughters of kings, these mythological figures. So at some point Zeus caught sight of her and thought she was pretty lovely, so in usual Zeus fashion he said, "I'm gonna have some of that. What you have to say about it, that's neither here nor there." And then, depending on the version of the story, either Zeus turns her into a cow so that he can keep her hidden in plain sight, or Hera finds out about this situation and she's the one who turns Io decidedly bovine. In this version, she doesn't even accept Zeus's advances. She manages to successfully rebuff the god of gods, and she still faces Hera's wrath anyway. The punishment is the usual metamorphosis, plus Hera sets a stinging gadfly to eternally torment her and make sure that she never stops moving. So, you know, when she comes across Prometheus, the two of them can kind of bond a little bit about suffering a cruel and unusual punishment through all eternity. Kind of nice, really. That's how all friendships start, right? Now, since Prometheus is a little bit psychic, you know, just a little bit, the two of them actually tell Io's story together, in tandem. But Prometheus keeps on going into the future. He foretells her journey to Egypt and to the Nile. That's where, you know, Zeus will swoop down on her, and one thing will lead to another, and she will bear his child. And one of this child's distant descendants will be Heracles, the one who will free Prometheus. Don't worry, I'm not like Disney. I won't assume that you don't know who Heracles is and that you've only heard of Hercules. So Io exits with a brilliantly unhinged final expression of woe. "My frantic tongue that raves I know not what, a random tide of words, a froth of muddied waters buffeting the wide, high-crested, hateful wave of ruin and God's wrath." Exits raving. Not the only translation, but one of the more entertaining ones. Prometheus' next and final guest is Hermes, who is a sarcastic bootlicker. He comes with an ultimatum from Zeus. You know, let them know the prognosticated downfall that you have foreseen, or have an eagle peck at your innards every day. Sounds like one of those Reddit 50-50 challenges, doesn't it? But proud Prometheus just patronizes this guy and sends him off back to Olympus. Now the chorus, despite knowing that if they stay there, they're going to be caught up in the huge bolt of thunder that's going to split the mountain and start Prometheus's punishment, they decide to just stay by his side. This is a signal of their support and their agreement that Zeus is a tyrant and that his downfall is something that they should be wishing for. Oh, Oceanus, you raised a bunch of rebels, didn't you? So the play ends on the cliffhanger of Zeus's terrible punishment beginning, which would presumably have been a chance for some spectacular special effects on stage. What those were 2,500 years ago, I can't tell you. Now, mythology is of course malleable. These same stories were told in different ways by different storytellers. You know, I think that's one of the really nice ways in which the ancient Greeks engaged with their religion. In other versions, you'll see Io much more of a willing partner to Zeus, very happy to bear his child, or you'll see Hermes as a kind of ally to Io. Aeschylus gives us a very pure and virginal Io, which serves to further make Zeus look like the bad guy in the situation. Which I have to tell you, he pretty much always is. For me, all of this contempt for Zeus is pointing towards eventual confrontation and then reconciliation at the end. The sequels would presumably include Heracles as another character coming to rescue Prometheus, and possibly Pandora as well. But alas, we will in all probability never know what else Aeschylus, or whoever else might have written this, actually wrote. But I am very glad that this got written at all and survived through posterity. There's so much here that's so compelling and still interesting for a modern day audience. You know, here you have this tragic hero who's being punished for helping those much less fortunate than he is. And his circumstances lead him to engage with people whose situations are similar and dissimilar to his. I end up really wanting to know what happens, and that's another reason it's quite nice that these myths were all different versions of the same basic stories, because we have the spoiler that Heracles is going to come to the rescue. Though bear in mind that this was many, many generations down the line, so that's a lot of pecked out livers. Let's take a moment to remember all those lost livers. Press F to pay respects. Okay, I'm going to wind it up here. I purposely chose something relatively short and simple because, you know, I'm not sure how I'm going to make a video about the Iliad or the Odyssey when I struggle to make a video about a 6-minute rock song under 45 minutes. But hopefully I'm getting better and better at the streamlining process. Therefore, that's all for now, and I will see you again next time for another great work!